Today, we are undertaking a comprehensive analysis of a film that, well, it really captured the paranoia and wonder of the early 1980s. It kind of defined suburban horror, all while carrying one of the most complex and contested creative histories in cinematic memory, 1982's Poltergeist.
It is a phenomenal subject. I mean, its
Wow.
significance far outweighs its runtime. For those of you who might need a quick refresher, though we won't be focusing on the plot, the story revolves around the Freeling family.
Stephen, Diane, and their three kids.
Exactly. They're living the seemingly perfect, upwardly mobile life in a planned community, Cuesta Verde, California. And the entire premise is built on the absolute shattering of that American dream.
Right, when these malevolent spirits emerge and eventually abduct their youngest daughter, Carol Ann.
And the statistics from its release, they really underscore just how massive this phenomenon was. Poltergeist premiered on June 4th, 1982. It was distributed by MGM-UA Entertainment Co.
And the budget, considering what they put on screen, it was surprisingly tight, only about $10.7 million.
Yeah, that's a fraction of what a blockbuster costs today, a tiny fraction. But the return on that investment was just astronomical. It secured its status instantly. It brought in a staggering $121.7 million at the domestic box office.
Wow.
That commercial success placed it as the eighth highest grossing film of 1982. And crucially, it held the title of the highest grossing horror film released that year.
So it was a massive cross-genre hit.
It absolutely was.
And that success, especially coupled with E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which came out at the same time, it prompted publications like Time and Newsweek to quickly coin that period the Spielberg summer.
Right. And our mission here isn't to just rewatch the film. It's to use our sources to really understand its unique position in history. The contentious story behind the camera, the technical innovations that scared a whole generation.
And the lasting and often tragic legacy that continues to define the entire franchise.
We're going to unpack that extraordinary creative tension, the one that led to one of Hollywood's biggest authorship disputes. We'll examine the award-winning craft that set new standards for visual effects and trace the film's cultural footprint across animation, music, and even theme parks.
It's really an exploration into how controversy and spectacle can contribute just as much to a film's classic status as the script itself. Okay, let's get right into it. The question of who truly directed Poltergeist. The official credit, of course, belongs to Tobe Hooper.
The man famous for the visceral, raw terror of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Exactly. But the sources, they immediately thrust us into one of the most complex production stories of that whole era. It seems the roles of producer, writer, and director didn't just overlap, they collided dramatically.
This authorship debate is completely inseparable from the film's history. It's part of its DNA. The initial seed for the movie, it actually came from a totally different project of Steven Spielberg's. It was originally titled Night Skies.
Night Skies? So that wasn't a ghost story.
Not at all. Spielberg conceived of Night Skies as a darker, much more horror-based follow-up to his big 1977 hit, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was about malevolent alien invaders.
Okay, so a complete pivot. How did we get from aliens to ghosts?
Well, when Spielberg brought Hooper on board, Hooper suggested that, given his own background in that kind of grounded psychological horror, they should collaborate on a ghost story instead.
One focused on a family.
Yes, a quintessential American family being terrorized in their own home. Spielberg loved the concept, and that's how Poltergeist was born. But what immediately complicated everything was a massive contractual constraint on Spielberg.
He had that rival studio contract, right?
Exactly. He had a contract with Universal Studios that explicitly prevented him from directing another film while he was making E.T. the Extraterrestrial. So Tobe Hooper, the horror visionary, had to be brought in as the official director.
But Spielberg was intensely involved from day one. He was the writer, producer, and chief creative force.
And that level of producer involvement, it led almost immediately to these conflicting accounts of who was really in charge on set.
The common view, certainly at the time, suggested Spielberg was the de facto co-director, or maybe even the main director.
It was largely because of his consistent physical presence on set and his own comments to the press.
Spielberg himself really fueled that narrative of control, didn't he?
He certainly did. There's a quote from the Los Angeles Times in May of 1982 where he said, and this is so crucial, "Tobe isn't a take charge sort of guy. If a question was asked and an answer wasn't immediately forthcoming, I'd jump in and say what we could do."
Wow.
He finishes by saying Tobe would not agreement, and that became the process of collaboration.
That language, It suggests a very clear power dynamic, almost paternalistic. Spielberg was filling what he saw as creative
Yeah,
voids.
and his co-producer Frank Marshall, he backed that up,
Yeah.
unequivocally. Marshall stated to the LA Times that the creative force of the movie was Steven.
And he provided details to support that, right?
Yeah. Oh, very specific details. He claimed that Spielberg personally designed and drew every storyboard for the entire film,
Every single one.
every single one. And Marshall also confirmed Spielberg was physically on set every single day, except for 3 days when he was in Hawaii with George Lucas.
That is just an extraordinary level of hands-on participation for a producer.
Almost unheard of,
Of-
especially for someone who was technically busy directing another massive film like E.T. at the same time.
It really speaks to how personal this material was to Spielberg.
It does, but it also created a completely untenable situation for Tobe Hooper, who was, the official director of record.
So it seems that perspective, the idea that Hooper was just a figurehead, almost was dominant in the media early on, but our sources also provide a really strong defense of Hooper's specific contributions.
They absolutely do. Hooper and many of the cast and crew strongly disputed this notion that he was just along for the ride. Hooper tried to clarify where the controversy even came from. In later interviews, he suggested the rumors started from a misunderstanding.
A report in the Los Angeles Times.
Yes, about Spielberg shooting separate footage of little race cars outside the Freeling house while Hooper was busy shooting another scene. Hooper maintained that from that one small detail, quote, it became its own legend of dual direction.
But the more powerful defense really comes from the people who were there in front of the camera receiving directions every day.
Definitely. There's a 2012 article in Rue Morgue magazine that commemorated the film's 30th anniversary. It collected interviews from several cast and crew members who, it reported, unanimously sided with Hooper.
And what's essential there is the distinction of labor on set. Who was doing what job?
Right. Oliver Robbins, who played the son, Robbie Freeling, was very clear about the mechanics of it.
What did he say?
He said, the guy who sets up the shots, blocks the actors, and works with the crew to create a vision is the director. In those terms, Tobe is the director. He's the one who directed me anyway.
So that suggests Hooper was definitely handling the core mechanics of filmmaking.
And we also have James Caron, who played Stephen Freeling's boss, Mr. Teague. He acknowledged the tension, but confirmed Hooper's authority. His quote was simple, I considered Tobe my director. This confirms that even if Spielberg was right there, Hooper was the one giving the primary direction to the actors.
There's also some more nuanced testimony from the crew, right?
Yes. The makeup and effects artist Craig Reardon noted that Spielberg often had the final say. He cited one instance where Spielberg vetoed Hooper's original, more gruesome version of that cancerous steak effect in the kitchen scene.
But even with that kind of oversight.
Even with that, another cast member, Martin Casella, said that while, quote, so much of Poltergeist looks and feels like a Spielberg movie, his memory was that Tobe was mostly directing the day-to-day action.
So it was a true, if maybe unbalanced, collaboration.
That's a good way to put it.
This internal and public tension surrounding the credit, it eventually led to official action from Hollywood's governing body.
The Directors Guild of America, the DGA, they opened an investigation.
What was the official reason?
The investigation was into the question of whether or not Hooper's official credit was being denigrated by the statement Spielberg had made claiming so much control.
Because the DGA protects the integrity of that director's credit. It's considered sacrosanct.
It is. The investigation resulted in an arbitrator's ruling that, well, it didn't strip Hooper of his credit. He kept that. But it did compel MGM-UA Entertainment Company to pay $15,000 to Hooper.
And what was that payment for, specifically?
It was specifically because the studio had given producer Spielberg a more prominent credit than director Hooper in the trailers and promotional materials.
That's a fascinating detail. So it wasn't about who said action and cut on set. It was about the marketing. It was about who the studio felt was the bigger commercial draw.
Precisely. But the ruling did acknowledge the broader dispute, noting that broader issues of dispute exist between producer-writer, Spielberg, and the director.
So the DGA was affirming Hooper's professional standing. They were making a point that studios couldn't use the celebrity of a producer to commercially overshadow the credited director.
It was a pivotal moment for creative control and marketing ethics in Hollywood, for sure.
And maybe the most definitive public resolution came from Spielberg himself. He issued an open letter right around the time the film was released.
Yes, in the Hollywood Reporter.
Yeah.
And this letter was a masterclass in Hollywood diplomacy. Spielberg publicly praised Hooper, noting that the press had misunderstood their rather unique creative relationship.
He made a specific point of emphasizing his involvement, though.
He did. He said, "I enjoyed your openness in allowing me, as a writer and a producer, a wide berth for creative involvement." But he concluded by fully confirming Hooper's competence. He wrote, "You delivered the goods. You performed responsibly and professionally throughout the time I spent with you."
So he essentially used a public statement to simultaneously acknowledge his deep involvement while formally validating Hooper's authority, a very careful balancing act.
It was. That letter served as the official public acknowledgement needed to quell the DGA investigation and the media frenzy. It made sure the film's success wasn't undermined by all the infighting.
But the speculation, of course, it didn't end there. After Hooper's death in 2017, the debate surfaced all over again.
It did. And director Mick Garris, who actually worked as a publicist on the film and made several set visits, came to Hooper's defense.
And he had a really valuable outsider's perspective on the dynamic between the two men.
Garris's insight suggested a context of maybe intimidation rather than outright control. He confirmed that Tobe was always calling action and cut, and emphasized that Hooper had been deeply involved in all of the pre-production.
So Garris argued that Spielberg wasn't malicious or controlling, but just overwhelmingly enthusiastic.
Yes. And that changes the framing, doesn't it? If Spielberg is just intensely excited, what pressure does that put on a director like Hooper, who is on his first major studio film?
Garris summed up that impossible position.
He did. He said, "You're on your first studio film, hired by Steven Spielberg, who is enthusiastically involved in this movie. Are you going to say, stop that? Let me do this?" Garris ultimately concluded that Tobe's vision is very much realized there. And Tobe got credit because he deserved credit.
So the final product is a testament to that chaotic mix. Hooper's raw horror sensibility and Spielberg's blockbuster architecture.
It raises an important question about the future of creative control.
Yeah. Does the final product, this distinctive hybrid classic, does it transcend the identity of the person who ultimately yelled action?
It seems the friction itself, that blending of Hooper's raw, visceral energy with Spielberg's polished, family-centric aesthetic, is precisely what created the unique tone that resonated so deeply.
The conflicting forces, far from destroying the film, may actually be why it has such a singular, powerful feel.
It feels safe enough for a family audience, but dark enough to deliver genuine scares. A very tricky balance.
Moving now from the boardroom arguments and all that creative tension to the sound stages, let's look at the talent that brought this story to life. And of course, the cutting-edge technology that burned it into our collective memory.
The foundation, of course, was that incredibly relatable family, the Freelings. The casting was just crucial because you, the audience, you needed to believe in that family unit before all the chaos erupted.
The parents were so perfectly played by Craig T. Nelson as Stephen Freeling,
The perpetually stressed real estate agent father.
and JoBeth Williams as the highly sensitive, intensely maternal Diane.
And Williams's performance, her deeply emotional performance, it earned her a Saturn Award nomination for Best Actress.
The casting of the children was just as important for anchoring the emotional reality amidst all the supernatural chaos.
You had Oliver Robbins as the son, Robbie, Dominique Dunne as the eldest daughter, Dana,
And of course, the iconic Heather O'Rourke as the young Carol Ann, who really provided the film's narrative center.
and we absolutely cannot discuss this cast without highlighting the unforgettable performance of Zelda Rubinstein.
As the spiritual medium, Tangina Barons.
Her arrival signals that shift from a mere haunting to a spiritual intervention. Her distinctive voice, her whole synthesis of the situation, it provided the necessary context for the audience.
And her contribution was recognized with a Saturn Award win for Best Supporting Actress.
So while the cast made the horror emotionally resonant, the film's lasting visual power came directly from its technical achievements.
The special effects were overseen by Richard Edlund at George Lucas's legendary Industrial Light and Magic, ILM.
Which demonstrates a commitment to cutting-edge visual effects, usually reserved for science fiction blockbusters, not horror films.
And that commitment definitely paid off in industry recognition. The film won the prestigious BAFTA Award for Best Special Visual Effects.
It also earned a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, which, in a great piece of irony, it lost to its summer competition.
To its sister film, E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Exactly. It's incredible that the two greatest technical films of 1982 were battling each other. It perfectly captures that Spielberg summer dynamic.
Let's actually get into some of the technical nuggets. That scene where Diane is pulled across the floor and then appears to climb the walls of the children's room, how do they do that?
That spectacular illusion is a perfect example of classic Hollywood ingenuity.
Mm.
Relied entirely on practical effects. It was achieved using a static camera positioned outside of a massive, specially constructed set.
Which itself was mounted on gimbals and motorized to rotate 360 degrees.
Precisely. The camera never moved. The room moved around JoBeth Williams.
That just sounds like an engineering nightmare. What was the mechanism behind it, and what was the physical challenge for her?
Well, our sources suggest the set was essentially this massive steel box that required perfect hydraulic calibration. When the scene begins, Williams starts walking on what is the floor, but as the set rotates, the floor becomes the wall.
So she has to maintain her balance and her performance while gravity is literally shifting all around her.
Exactly. It was incredibly demanding physically, requiring precise timing and causing significant disorientation.
It was an homage, right, to an older film.
Yes, a clear homage to a technique used decades earlier in that classic Fred Astaire sequence in the 1951 film Royal Wedding.
It's a trick that relies on the audience just trusting the frame. Speaking of classic cinematic techniques, another powerful visual trick was used in the hallway scene.
That was the famous dolly zoom, also known as the vertigo effect, or sometimes the Zolly shot.
And how is that achieved?
You simultaneously move the camera back on a dolly track while zooming the lens forward. In that scene where Diane runs down the hallway toward Carol Ann's room, this technique creates the illusion of the space rapidly expanding and contracting. The background appears to move away, while the foreground stays the same size.
And what's the psychological impact of that? Why use it in that moment?
It creates this visual feeling of deep unease and panic. It's meant to mimic the psychological experience of a nightmare or vertigo. It visually underlines the film's core theme. The home, what should be the safest space, is actively distorting and betraying the family. It amplifies Diane's panic.
The space is literally fighting against her attempt to reach her child. But maybe the most complicated effects weren't structural, but atmospheric. Specifically, making the light from Carol Ann's closet portal feel alive.
Spielberg recalled that the lighting effects used in that closet were arguably the most complex practical setup in the entire production. They employed a massive combination of lighting elements to create that chaotic, energetic glow.
Like what?
Strobes, bright spotlights they called Las Vegas spots, and large fish tanks filled with water placed in front of the lights.
For diffusion.
Exactly, to provide different kinds of organic diffusion to the beams.
And beyond the light itself, they needed to make the entire environment feel dynamic, right?
Absolutely. They needed movement, not just light.
Mm.
They used 4 very large wind machines, all operating at once. The intention, as Spielberg recalled, was that they wanted the light to live. They wanted it to feel like a breathing, unpredictable spiritual force interacting physically with the room.
It shows a genuine commitment to tactile, immersive effects rather than just relying on post-production digital manipulation. And finally, a massive, indispensable component of the film's atmosphere and success was the crucial role of Jerry Goldsmith's Oscar-nominated score.
Goldsmith's score is widely regarded as a masterpiece of supernatural cinema. It works specifically with Spielberg's direction for profound emotional effect, not just to score jump scares.
And Goldsmith worked exclusively with Spielberg on the music during post-production.
Yes, which is another clear indication of Spielberg exercising his creative vision in areas where those contractual constraints didn't apply.
Goldsmith described Spielberg as very articulate about music. So what specific thematic elements did they develop together?
They developed multiple distinct leitmotifs, or recurring themes, designed to reflect the film's complex layers. First and most recognized is the lullaby, Carol Ann's theme.
That deceptively innocent melody.
Crafted to represent the blissful suburban life of the Freelings and the innocence of Carol Ann, it acts as a grounding element before the chaos.
So that theme is almost a symbol of the idyllic life that's being threatened?
Precisely. It's the theme of safety and normalcy. And you contrast that with the second major theme. Goldsmith developed this semi-religious melody that was intended to score the souls caught between worlds.
Why religious?
Spielberg believed that much of the closet action should have a quasi-religious, almost mournful atmosphere. He wanted to acknowledge that many of the spirits were just confused or trapped, not inherently evil.
And then, of course, the terror needed its own signature sound to differentiate the truly malevolent force, the beast, from those trapped souls.
For the genuine moments of terror and confrontation, Goldsmith deployed these dissonant tonal blasts and harsh string work. This provided a sharp, unsettling sonic contrast to the childlike lullaby and the mournful spiritual melody.
It's a very sophisticated three-tiered score. It really elevated the emotional complexity beyond your standard horror fare.
It did.
That structural complexity is fascinating. Was there anything left on the cutting room floor musically?
There was. For music collectors, there's an alternate version of Carol Ann's theme that actually includes lyrics. It's unofficially titled Bless This House. It was recorded and released on the original album, but it wasn't featured in the final theatrical cut of the film.
Any idea why?
We can only speculate, but perhaps the use of actual lyrics just felt too sentimental. Maybe it was too far removed from the horror element and disrupted the tension they were trying to build.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture, the reason this film resonated so deeply across the cultural spectrum is because it successfully married that high-tech spectacle with fundamental, deeply relatable American anxieties.
It made the supernatural feel like a deeply personal consequence of corporate overreach.
And the film was immediately and generally very well received by critics.
It maintains an impressive 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it achieved a rare A grade from audiences polled by CinemaScore.
That speaks volumes about its ability to satisfy both critics and the general moviegoing public.
Roger Ebert, for instance, gave it high praise. He called it an effective thriller. He specifically highlighted that Hooper and Spielberg were successful because they tried to see the movie's strange events through the eyes of the family members.
So the effects, the floating objects, the light shows, they never overwhelm the human emotional core of the film.
Exactly. And Vincent Canby of the New York Times concurred. He called it a marvelously spooky ghost story with extraordinary technical effects that managed to be often eerie and beautiful, but also occasionally vividly gruesome.
That balance, the eerie beauty alongside the gruesomeness, that's a direct result of that complex dual authorship we talked about.
But the film's staying power is deeply rooted in its thematic structure. The idea of family comfort and safety being violently betrayed.
Critics immediately picked up on that deeper meaning.
They saw it as a classic fairy tale, but set in the modern suburbs. Peter Rayner in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner argued that the plot mirrored a fairy tale structure.
The little girl putting her parents through the most intense tribulation imaginable to prove their love for her.
Exactly. He noted that fairy tales always begin with the disruption of the family order, but their conclusion is always a return to order, affirming the indestructible nature of family bonds.
And that idea of the family unit proving its resilience was key. Andrew Sarris echoed this in The Village Voice.
He focused on the collective action. When Carol Ann is lost, the parents and the two older children come together in blood-kin empathy to form a larger-than-life family that will reach down to the gates of hell to save its loved ones.
So the horror serves not to destroy the family, but to crystallize its strength.
Nice.
While the praise was widespread, especially for the effects and emotional core, it's important to acknowledge the dissenting voices.
Which often reflected the complexity of the authorship.
Gene Siskel gave the film a notably low rating. He argued that while it was excellent at setting up that idyllic suburban life,
He said, when it comes time for the terror to begin, the whole thing is very, very silly. He felt the over-the-top effects just cheapened the psychological setup.
And Gary Arnold of The Washington Post offered a critique that certainly seems to reference the production difficulties we detailed earlier.
He noted that the film looks and feels decidedly patchy, as if it had been assembled by different hands, frequently working at cross purposes.
That patchy feeling, the clash between the raw horror and the polished sentiment, was precisely the byproduct of the Hooper-Spielberg dynamic.
It was.
But the core of the film's conflict, the underlying premise that fuels the climax, is the thematic justification for the Poltergeist intrusion, the utter desecration of sacred space in pursuit of corporate profit.
We see this through Stephen Freeling, the father and real estate agent himself. He learns the terrible central truth from his boss, Louis Teague. The Cuesta Verde development, that whole perfect suburban dream, was literally built over a former cemetery.
And this reveal is not just a plot point. It's a scathing critique of corporate greed and the facade of the American dream.
The critical revelation is that Louis Teague, Stephen's boss and the developer, moved only the gravestones and headstones to create a fake, attractive park,
The actual bodies and remains were left in the ground.
deeply disturbing the resting spirits. The horror, then, is not random. It is a direct consequence of historical and corporate betrayal. And this fuels that spectacular, gruesome climax.
Correct. The haunting crescendos spectacularly when skeletal corpses erupt violently from the ground in the backyard and the flooded swimming pool excavation.
That visceral scene provides the explicit thematic reason for the haunting and the urgent need for the family to flee a property built on lies and disrespect.
The poltergeist is essentially the karmic backlash against unchecked development.
It really is.
Despite losing all three of its Academy Award nominations, Best Original Score, Best Sound Effects Editing, and Best Visual Effects to E.T. in a clean sweep.
Poltergeist certainly received major recognition that cemented its standing in genre history.
It secured its standing by winning 3 Saturn Awards, confirming its status in the science fiction and horror community.
Best Horror or Thriller Film,
Mm-hmm.
Best Makeup, and Best Supporting Actress for the iconic Zelda Rubinstein.
It also holds a permanent spot on the American Film Institute's 100 Years.100 Zerial Thrills list at number 84.
And speaking of lasting cultural power, the single line that defines the film, "They're here,"
Is named the 69th greatest movie quote on the AFI's list. That demonstrates its linguistic resonance decades later.
that recognition speaks volumes about its lasting influence. But here's where the story gets really interesting and frankly heartbreaking. The film rapidly developed an unfortunate notoriety tied to the early deaths of several people associated with it, a phenomenon that the media dubbed the Poltergeist curse.
The concept of a curse gained significant media traction due to the tragic premature deaths of multiple cast members across the first 3 films. This notion was explored in depth and sensationalized during an E! True Hollywood Story episode dedicated entirely to the franchise.
We must approach this tragic aspect with great sympathy and respect, acknowledging the tremendous loss. 2 of the main children in the film, Heather O'Rourke and Dominique Dunne, passed away tragically young shortly after their involvement.
Dominique Dunne, who played the eldest daughter Dana Freeling, died in 1982, shortly after the film's release.
And Heather O'Rourke, the unforgettable Carol Ann Freeling, who starred in all 3 films of the original trilogy, also passed away young in 1988 due to medical complications.
These tragic losses, coupled with others associated with the subsequent films, cemented this enduring, dark legend surrounding the franchise in popular culture. It created a narrative of supernatural misfortune around the film's production.
Shifting now to the cinematic continuation of the story, the original film spawned 2 sequels and a remake, though none managed to recapture the original's unique blend of emotional core and technical precision.
Poltergeist 2. The Other Side followed in 1986, and Poltergeist III was released in 1988. What's crucial to understand is how the sequels fundamentally altered the origin of the evil, which inadvertently lost the thematic power of the original.
That's right, the original's horror stemmed from that grounded thematic critique of the disturbed cemetery bodies, a consequence of greed. But the sequels pivoted entirely away from that.
Poltergeist II introduced a completely new mythology.
Yes. It revealed that the evil entity was tied not to disturbed graves, but to a sinister cult leader named Henry Kane, who had led his religious sect to their doom in the 1820s.
He sealed them in an underground cavern.
And the cemetery was explained to be built above this cave where Kane and his followers met their ends. Kane's spirit, often called the Beast, was the primary villain, seeking to control his flock even in death.
This shift takes the horror from a modern suburban critique to a classic supernatural struggle against a specific demonic entity.
Exactly. And Poltergeist III continued this spiritual battle, finding Carol Ann, the sole original family member remaining, living in an elaborate Chicago skyscraper. Kane follows her there, using the building's decorative mirrors as portals to the earthly plane.
And the commercial viability of the story remains strong today. There was a 2015 remake, and a new television series is reported to be in early development at Amazon MGM Studios.
What's fascinating here is how quickly the original 1982 film permeated popular culture. It became a recognizable shorthand for suburban supernatural chaos.
Its resonance is visible everywhere, particularly in animation and comedy.
The sheer volume of parodies demonstrates its iconic status. Bad Dream House, the very first segment of The Simpsons' annual Treehouse of Horror Halloween specials.
Is a detailed and direct parody. The floating objects, the light in the closet, the disappearance of the child, it's all there.
And Seth MacFarlane's animated series are especially keen on homages. The 2006 Family Guy episode Poltergeist is entirely devoted to the theme.
That episode specifically uses the Freeling family premise. Peter Griffin's backyard construction uncovers an Indian chief's skull, leading to a poltergeist invasion.
And that parody actually draws the thematic link between suburban construction and historical injustice even more explicitly than the original film did.
That episode went deep, too. It
Yeah.
used some of the exact musical cues from Jerry Goldsmith's original score and painstakingly recreated several of the film's most famous scenes, like the tree attack.
American Dad also parodied the film in its episode Poltergasm, where the character Roger plays Ruby Zeldestein.
Which is a highly humorous and specific nod to Tangina Barons.
And beyond animation, the film influenced music and themed entertainment globally. The horror punk band Misfits based their 1997 song Shining directly on the film.
The chorus is centered explicitly on the refrain, Carol Ann, Carol Ann.
And demonstrating its commercial power decades later, the film became the subject of popular, elaborate walkthrough attractions at both Universal Studios Orlando and Hollywood's annual Halloween Horror Nights event.
Which proves that even 40 years on, the visual iconography of the Freelings Haunted House remains highly potent and marketable.
Before we conclude, we should dedicate some time to the novelization by James Caan.
Right. While most of the audience only experienced the final theatrical cut, the novel offered a radically different, deeper look into the world the filmmakers created.
Caan adapted the film from the original screenplay, and while the film focuses mainly on the immediate, terrifying experience of the Freeling family, the book leaned much more heavily toward expanding the philosophical and psychological dimensions of the haunting.
A key difference was the relationship between Tangina Barons and the parapsychologist Dr. Lesh.
In the book, their dynamic is significantly fleshed out. It reflects a more complex scientific versus faith dialogue, with Dr. Lesh being far more skeptical. And Tangina provides these lengthy internal monologues about the nature of the spirits and their trapped state.
We mentioned the kitchen scene earlier. The novelization didn't shy away from graphic psychological horror.
Not at all. The brief scene in the film where Marty peels his face back becomes a much more prolonged, gruesome psychological torment in print. In the book, Marty is frozen in place and skeletonized in a far more elaborate, chilling sequence involving imagined spiders and rats consuming him before he's returned to normal.
Which shows the novel felt free to pursue the raw terror that maybe Hooper was aiming for before Spielberg polished the final cut.
And the novelization also added entirely new canon elements that never made it to the screen, deepening the Freeling family's mythology.
Most significantly, it introduced a benevolent spiritual figure known as the Waiting Woman.
This spirit acted as a protector for Carol Ann while she was held captive in the spirit world, providing a layer of spiritual complexity that was absent from the final film.
That not all entities crossing over were hostile.
Right, and Caan added a scene where Robbie mysteriously discovers the iconic clown doll in the yard during his birthday party, essentially giving the clown an origin story that links it to the curse of the house.
So synthesizing everything we've looked at, the history of Poltergeist is truly a tapestry woven from unprecedented creative controversy, massive technical genius, and enduring human tragedy. We explored that fraught relationship between Hooper and Spielberg, the groundbreaking special effects, like the elaborate rotating set and the complex light work that captured America's imagination, and the tragic yet influential legacy that cemented the film as a cultural touchstone, something far beyond mere horror.
And this raises an important question for you to think about. If the conversation around a film, including the debates over its authorship, the engineering of a spectacle, and the tragedies that surround it, is often more memorable and discussed than the intricacies of its plot, does the identity of the credited director truly matter to the audience enjoying its lasting effect? The Poltergeist experience proves that the surrounding cultural phenomenon is a powerful engine of immortality for a work of art.
The power of that suburban nightmare and that simple line, "They're here," continues to resonate because it touched a deep nerve about the safety and sanctity of home in the face of corporate betrayal. This knowledge base really spans genre history, technical filmmaking, and cultural sociology, making it a truly compelling subject.
We hope you gained a new, expansive appreciation for the complicated story behind this 1982 classic.
Thanks for listening.